You're not attracting poverty because of bad luck. You're feeding it through 3 mental habits that feel completely normal. And the most dangerous part is this. You might be doing all 3 every single day. The first one comes out of your mouth. The second one shows up in the way you look at other people's lives. And the third begins the moment you hand control of your life to something outside of you. Your past, your family, the economy, other people, anything but yourself. These habits feel small, but over time, they train your mind to expect less, accept less, and repeat less. And here's the uncomfortable truth. A lot of people ask for prosperity, but speak like someone stuck in scarcity. A lot of people want abundance, but judge those who already have it. A lot of people want to change their life, but still see themselves as a victim of their story. And as long as that doesn't change, nothing really changes. Because poverty doesn't just start in your bank account. It starts in the way you interpret life, in the words you repeat, in the energy you hold, in the identity you accept. Today, you're going to understand why complaining, judgment, and victimhood are not just bad habits, they are mental programs. And when those programs run long enough, they start deciding your choices, your emotions, your opportunities, and your results. But here's the good news. The same place where poverty is created is the same place where it can be stopped. Your mind. Before we go deeper into this, let me invite you to do something simple. If you want to stop living on autopilot and start building a stronger, more conscious, more prosperous mind, take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Because here, you won't find empty motivation. You'll find clarity, direction, and principles that help you break invisible patterns and create a new level of life. Now pay close attention to the first habit, because it might be coming out of your mouth every single day, and you still call it just venting. There's an idea that might feel uncomfortable at first, but if you truly understand it, it can completely change the way you live. Poverty doesn't begin when money is missing. It begins when the mind gets used to certain patterns and starts repeating them without question. And here's the part most people don't want to accept. You can be working hard, doing your best, trying to grow, and still reinforcing the very thing that's holding you back. It sounds contradictory, I know. But let me show you something simple. Imagine 2 people with the same income, the same job, the same opportunities. One of them faces a problem and says, "This always happens to me. Nothing ever works." The other says, "Okay, this happened. What can I do differently now?" Externally, they're living the same situation. But internally, they're building completely different futures. Because it's not just what happens to you that shapes your life. It's how you respond. And most people were never taught to observe that. I remember a moment when I started noticing this pattern in myself. It was something small. I would complain about traffic, complain about work, complain about being tired. Nothing extreme, nothing serious, but it was constant. And one day I stopped and thought, what if this isn't just venting? What if this is a pattern? Because every time you repeat a thought, you strengthen a pathway in your mind. In neuroscience, it's simple. Neurons that fire together, wire together, which means what you repeat becomes automatic. Now think about this. If every day you reinforce thoughts of frustration, scarcity, or limitation, what will your mind begin to expect from life? More of the same. And here's a point that might sound controversial, but it's incredibly freeing. Your mind doesn't know the difference between what you live and what you constantly repeat. That's why 2 people can live the same reality and create completely different results over time. One begins to expand, the other begins to shrink. And this doesn't happen in dramatic ways. It happens in the details, in how you talk about your day, in how you react to mistakes, and how you interpret someone else's success. For example, someone close to you starts growing financially. You can think, if they did it, I can learn how to do it too. Or you can think, they probably just got lucky or had some advantage. See the difference? One mindset opens doors. The other quietly closes them. And the most interesting part is this. The person closing those doors usually doesn't even realize it, because it feels like just a normal thought. Now let me give you something practical. Starting today, try a simple exercise. For the next 24 hours, observe your own words. Don't try to change anything yet. Just observe. How many times do you say something negative about your life? How many times do you complain about small things? How many times do you point out a problem without looking for a solution? This exercise is powerful because it pulls you out of autopilot. And when you step out of autopilot, you start seeing patterns that were invisible before. And here's the most important point of this section. You don't change your life just by changing your actions. You change your life when you change the patterns behind those actions. And this is exactly where most people get stuck, because they try to change the outcome without noticing what's creating the outcome. But there's one specific behavior so common, so normal, that almost everyone does it, and it quietly starts this entire cycle of scarcity. And what's fascinating is this. It begins so simply. You might be doing it right now, without even realizing it. The invisible habit that starts with your mouth. Now, I want you to pay very close attention, because the first pattern doesn't begin in your mind. It begins in your mouth. And that already challenges a common belief. Most people think thoughts come first, and then turn into words. But in real life, it often works the other way around. You speak, and then your mind rushes to justify what you just said, which means your words are not just a reflection of your reality. They are also programming it. And here's the part almost no one notices. Complaining is not just venting. Complaining is training your brain to find more reasons to complain. Sounds exaggerated? Let's bring it down to something simple. You wake up, check your phone, and think, another exhausting day. Then you hit traffic and say, my life is always like this. You get to work and say, nothing ever changes here. Now, stop and look at the pattern. You're not just describing your reality. You're reinforcing it. And the more you reinforce it, the more natural it becomes. It's like you're telling your brain, find more of this, and your brain listens. Because your brain has a very clear job, to confirm what you believe is true. This is known as confirmation bias. If you believe your life is difficult, your brain will filter everything that proves it, but it will ignore or even reject anything that contradicts it. Now, let me give you a real example. Two people earn the same income. One says, this is never enough. I'm always struggling. The other says, this isn't ideal yet. But what can I do with this today? See the difference? The first enters a cycle of frustration. The second enters a state of creation. And that changes everything. The first person tends to avoid risks, complain more, feel stuck. The second starts looking for options. They might study money, learn a new skill, look for extra income. For example, instead of spending hours complaining, they might spend 30 minutes a day learning something useful. They could start with books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad to shift financial mindset, Secrets of the Millionaire Mind to understand internal patterns, Think and Grow Rich to build clarity and purpose, or even something simple, watching content about finance, sales, or digital skills. But notice this. The difference didn't start with action. It started with language. And that changes everything. Now here's where it gets deeper. Every time you complain, you enter an emotional state. And repeated emotion becomes a pattern. Pattern becomes identity. And identity becomes destiny. That's why complaining is so dangerous. Not because it's wrong to complain, but because, over time, you become someone who sees problems in everything. And when that happens, even when an opportunity shows up, you don't recognize it. Or worse, you reject it. How many people have you heard say, "That won't work. That's not for me. That's a scam," without even looking into it? That's not logic. That's conditioning. Now let me give you something practical. Over the next few days, try a small adjustment. Every time you catch yourself complaining, don't force yourself to stop. Just replace it. For example, instead of saying, "This is too hard," say, "This will require more from me." Instead of, "Nothing works," say, "What am I not seeing yet?" It sounds simple, but it completely changes the type of response your mind creates, because you're not denying reality. You're changing how you interact with it. And that's power. Now, here's something almost no one realizes. There is something even more subtle than complaining. Something that doesn't always come out through your words, but happens constantly inside your mind. And this pattern is even more dangerous, because it doesn't feel negative. It feels justified. And that's exactly why it traps so many people, without them ever noticing. The silent pattern that hides behind opinions. Now we're entering a level that most people never question. Because this second pattern doesn't sound negative. It doesn't sound like sabotage. It sounds like opinion. It sounds like observation. It sounds like you're just being honest. But in reality, it's shaping your life in ways you don't see. This pattern is judgment. And before you reject that word, let me make something clear. Judgment is not just criticizing someone out loud. It's much more subtle than that. It's every time you look at someone's life and internally define what you think about it, without realizing it. You are also defining your relationship with that reality. Let me explain. Imagine you see someone making more money than you. Your mind immediately reacts. Maybe you think, they probably got lucky. They had connections. That kind of success isn't for people like me. Now here's the question most people never ask. What did your brain just do in that moment? It didn't just analyze someone else. It created a boundary. It separated you from that level of reality. Because the moment you reject something internally, you stop moving toward it. And this is where it gets dangerous. Judgment creates distance, not from people, but from possibilities. You don't need to say it out loud. You don't need to act on it. Just thinking it consistently is enough, because your brain starts to categorize things. This is me. That is not me. And once that line is drawn, your behavior starts to follow it. Let me give you a simple, real-life example. Two people scroll through social media. Both see someone traveling, growing, making money. One thinks, that's inspiring. I want to understand how they did that. The other thinks, that's unrealistic, must be fake. Not for people like me. Same content, same moment. Completely different internal response. Now guess what happens over time? The first person becomes curious. Curiosity leads to learning. Learning leads to action. Action leads to change. The second person becomes closed. Closure leads to resistance. Resistance leads to inaction. Inaction leads to repetition. And repetition creates a life that looks exactly the same, year after year. And here's the most uncomfortable part. The person judging believes they're being intelligent. They believe they're being realistic. But in reality, they're protecting their current identity. Because if they accepted that something bigger is possible, they would also have to accept that change is required. And change is uncomfortable. So the mind does something very clever. It judges so it doesn't have to evolve. Now let me give you something practical. Next time you notice yourself reacting to someone's success, pause for a second. Instead of concluding something, ask a different question. Not, why is this not real? But, what can I learn from this? Not, this isn't for me. But, what would it take for this to become possible for me? That single shift turns judgment into awareness, and awareness into growth. Now, here's where it goes even deeper. Because judgment doesn't only show up when you look at others. It also shows up when you look at yourself. And this internal judgment might be the most limiting pattern of all, because it doesn't just block opportunities. It shapes how much you believe you deserve. And when that happens, you don't just stay where you are. You start accepting less than what you could become. But there's one more pattern, even more subtle, even more dangerous. Because this one doesn't just influence your thinking. It defines your identity. And once identity is affected, everything else follows. The most dangerous pattern, when you give your life away. Now we reach the third pattern. And this one is the most dangerous of all, because while the first shapes your focus, and the second shapes your perception, this one shapes your identity. And once identity is shaped, your entire life starts to follow it. This pattern is victimhood, but not in the obvious way people usually think. Most people hear victim and imagine someone weak, someone who gave up, someone who doesn't try. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about something much more subtle. Victimhood today often looks like this. I know I need to change, but it's hard because of my situation. I could do more, but my environment doesn't help. I try, but things never go my way. Now, listen carefully. Those statements may feel true. They may even be justified, but they carry a hidden cost. Every time you shift the cause of your life to something outside of you, you also shift the power. And that's the trap, because it feels like explanation, but it becomes limitation. Let me show you something simple. Two people face the same problem, same difficulty, same pressure, same reality. One says, this is happening because of everything around me. The other says, this is happening. Now what can I do about it? Same situation, different position. One places themselves at the center of action. The other places themselves at the center of reaction. And over time, that difference becomes massive. Because when you live in reaction, you wait. You wait for things to improve. You wait for people to change. You wait for the right moment. But when you live in responsibility, you move, even if it's imperfect, even if it's small, even if it's uncomfortable. Now let's make this real. Imagine someone who says, I can't improve my financial life because I don't have time. At first glance, that sounds reasonable. But look closer. That same person spends hours scrolling, watching content, consuming without direction. The issue is not time. It's ownership. And I say this with respect, not judgment, because almost everyone has been there at some point, including me. There was a time when I genuinely believed my results were tied to everything outside of me. The situation, a timing, other people. And as long as I believed that, nothing changed. Not because I wasn't capable, but because I wasn't positioned to act. That's what victimhood does. It doesn't destroy your potential. It disconnects you from it. Now here's the part most people don't expect. Victimhood is comfortable because it removes pressure. If it's not your fault, then it's not your responsibility. And if it's not your responsibility, you don't have to change. But here's the truth that changes everything. What you don't take responsibility for, you cannot change. That's why this pattern is so powerful, because it doesn't just keep you stuck. It convinces you that you're right to stay there. Now let me give you something practical. The next time you catch yourself explaining why something isn't working, pause and ask yourself one question. What part of this is still under my control? Not everything will be, but something always is. It could be your time, your focus, your learning, your reaction, your next step, and that's where your power lives. Not in controlling everything, but in taking ownership of something. Because once you reclaim even a small part, movement begins. And once movement begins, the cycle starts to break. Now, here's where everything connects. Because complaining shapes what you focus on. Judgment shapes what you accept or reject. And victimhood decides whether you act or wait. And when these three patterns operate together, they don't just influence your life. They create a loop, a silent loop, that repeats itself over and over again until it feels like destiny. But it's not destiny. It's a system. And in the next part, you're going to see exactly how this system works and why so many people stay trapped in it for years without ever realizing what's really happening. The invisible loop that keeps you stuck. Now you're about to see something that most people never stop to connect. Because up until this point, we've looked at the patterns separately. Complaining, judgment, victimhood. But in real life, they don't operate alone. They operate as a system, a loop. And once this loop is active, it starts running automatically, without effort, without awareness, without you even noticing. Let me show you how it works. It usually starts with something small. A situation doesn't go the way you expected. A delay, a frustration, a problem, and almost instantly, the first pattern activates. You complain. This always happens. Nothing works. Why is it like this again? Now your brain locks onto the negative. Your focus narrows. Your energy drops. And without realizing, you move into the second pattern. You begin to judge. You judge the situation. You judge people. You judge outcomes. This system is broken. People don't change. Success like that isn't real. And at this point, something subtle happens. Your mind begins to create distance between you and any possibility of change. And then the third pattern completes the cycle. Victimhood. Well, that's just how things are. That's my reality. There's nothing I can really do about it. And just like that, the loop closes. Now pause for a second. Because what just happened is more powerful than it looks. You didn't just react to a situation. You reinforced a system. A system that tells your brain, this is who I am. This is how life works. This is what I should expect. And once that system is reinforced enough times, it becomes automatic. You don't think about it. You don't question it. You just live it. Day after day, week after week, year after year. And eventually, you stop calling it a pattern. You start calling it your life. That's why so many people feel stuck. Not because they lack intelligence. Not because they lack opportunity. But because they're caught in a loop that feels normal. Now here's the most important part. This loop doesn't just affect your emotions. It affects your decisions. And your decisions shape your results. Let's make this real. Someone stuck in this loop sees an opportunity. But instead of exploring it, they complain. This won't work. They judge. This is probably not real. And then they settle. I guess this just isn't for me. Opportunity lost. Not because it wasn't there, but because the system rejected it. Now imagine this happening over and over again. Different situations, different moments, same pattern. That's how years pass without real change. Now here's the paradox. The same mind that creates this loop is the only thing that can break it. No external change can override an internal pattern that you keep reinforcing. That's why some people change environments, change jobs, change relationships, and still feel stuck. Because the loop travels with them. But here's where it becomes powerful. Once you can see the loop, you are no longer inside it unconsciously. And that changes everything. Because awareness interrupts automation. And interruption creates space. And in that space, you can choose differently. But most people never reach this point. Not because it's complex, but because it requires something they've been avoiding for a long time. And in the next part, you're going to see exactly what that is. Because breaking this loop doesn't start with motivation. It starts with something much more precise and much more uncomfortable. How to break the pattern starting today. Now we move from awareness to control, because seeing the loop is powerful, but breaking it requires precision. And here's where most people get it wrong. They try to be more positive. They try to stop thinking negative. They try to change everything at once. That doesn't work, because you're not dealing with motivation. You're dealing with conditioning, and conditioning is not broken by force. It's broken by replacement. So instead of trying to eliminate the patterns, you're going to interrupt and redirect them. Let's make this practical. There are 3 levels of intervention: simple, direct, effective. First, awareness in real time. Not later, not at night, not after the day is over. In the moment, the next time something goes wrong. Don't try to react better. Just notice. Okay, the loop is starting. That alone creates distance, because you're no longer inside the reaction. You're observing it. And the moment you observe, you weaken the automatic response. Second, controlled replacement. Not fake positivity, not pretending everything is fine, just a more useful direction. For example, instead of saying, "This is a problem," say, "This is feedback." Instead of, "Nothing works," say, "What can I adjust?" Instead of, "This always happens to me," say, "What is this trying to show me?" Small shift, massive impact. Because your brain now has a new instruction, and it starts working differently. Third, intentional action. This is where most people stop. They think awareness is enough. It's not. You need movement, even if it's small, even if it's imperfect, because action breaks emotional loops. Let's say you catch yourself complaining about money. Don't stop there. Do something. Spend 20 minutes learning a skill. Review your expenses. Look for one way to increase income. One action. That's all it takes to start shifting direction. Now let me give you a simple daily structure. Something you can actually apply. Morning. Before you check your phone, set one intention. What kind of mindset am I choosing today? Not a big speech, just a direction. During the day, observe your words and reactions. Not all of them, just enough to notice patterns. Night, ask yourself one question. Where did I repeat the old pattern? And where did I interrupt it? No judgment, just awareness. This is how you reprogram a mind, not in theory, but in repetition. Now here's something important. You will fail at this. You will forget. You will fall back into old reactions. That's part of the process. Because you're not trying to be perfect. You're training a new pattern. And patterns take time. But something starts changing immediately. Your perception shifts. Your reactions slow down. Your decisions become more intentional. And over time, your results follow. Now here's the key point. You don't need to fix your entire life. You just need to stop reinforcing what is keeping it the same. And once that happens, everything starts to move. But there's one final shift. That takes this to another level. Because even if you interrupt the patterns, even if you take action, there is still something deeper that defines how far you go. And that is not your behavior. It's your identity. And in the next part, you're going to understand how identity silently controls your results and why changing it changes everything. The identity that decides your results. Now we go deeper than behavior, deeper than thoughts, deeper than habits. Because even if you change how you think, even if you change how you act, There is something underneath all of that quietly deciding your results, your identity, not who you say you are, not who you want to be, but who you believe you are, when no one is watching. Because here's the truth most people don't realize. You don't live according to your goals. You live according to your identity. Let me make this simple. If someone sees themselves as bad with money, it doesn't matter how many strategies they learn. At some point, they will return to that identity. If someone believes, I'm not disciplined, they might try for a few days, but eventually, they will prove themselves right, not because they lack ability, but because identity always seeks confirmation. Now connect this with everything you've seen so far. Complaining reinforces a story. Judgment defines what feels possible. Victimhood removes control. And together, they build an identity that sounds like this. This is just who I am. This is how my life works. This is what I can expect. And once that identity is accepted, your mind starts protecting it, even if it's limiting, even if it's painful, because to the brain, familiar is safe, even when it's not beneficial. That's why change feels uncomfortable, not because it's hard, but because it threatens who you think you are. Now let's make this real. Imagine someone who has always struggled financially. They start improving, they learn, they grow, they earn more, but internally, they still feel like someone who struggles. What happens? They overspend, they hesitate, they sabotage opportunities, not consciously, but consistently. Why? Because their identity hasn't changed. And identity always wins. Now here's the part that changes everything. You don't change your identity by saying affirmations. You don't change it by forcing belief. You change it by evidence. Small, repeated, undeniable evidence. Let me show you how. If you want to become someone disciplined, don't start with big promises. Start with one small action you can repeat daily. Something so simple you can't avoid it. For example, reading 5 pages a day, saving a small amount consistently, learning for 20 minutes, not because it's impressive, but because it's consistent. And consistency sends a message to your brain. This is who I am now. Over time, that message becomes stronger than the old one, and slowly, your identity begins to shift. Now here's something most people overlook. Your environment reinforces your identity. What you watch, what you listen to, who you follow, what you read, all of it sends signals to your mind. So if you constantly consume negativity, complaints, limiting beliefs, your identity absorbs that. But if you start exposing yourself to growth, clarity, higher standards, your mind begins to recalibrate. That's why books matter. That's why content matters. That's why conversations matter. Because they shape what feels normal to you. And what feels normal becomes your standard. Now pause and ask yourself, what kind of identity have I been reinforcing without realizing it? Because the answer to that question explains a lot about your current life. And here's the most important shift. You don't need to become someone else. You need to stop reinforcing who you are no longer meant to be. Because once identity shifts, decisions shift, actions shift, results shift, and life starts to move in a new direction. But there's one final step that most people never fully apply, because it requires something simple, but very rare. Consistency with awareness. And in the next part, you're going to see how to lock this in, so these patterns don't come back and quietly take control again. Locking the change. Why most people go back, and how you won't. Now here's the part that separates temporary change from real transformation, because understanding all of this is not the problem. Most people, at some level, already know they complain too much, judge too quickly, and give away control without noticing. That's not new. What's rare is consistency with awareness. Because here's what usually happens. Someone watches something like this. They feel motivated. They feel clear. They feel ready. And for a few days, they actually change. They speak differently. They think differently. They act differently. But then, life happens. Stress comes back. Problems return. Old environments pull them in. And slowly, without noticing, they return to the same patterns. Not because they want to, but because the old system is still stronger than the new one. And this is where most people fail. They think change is about intensity. It's not. Change is about stability. Let me explain. Doing something perfectly for 3 days doesn't change your life. Doing something consistently for 30, 60, 90 days starts to rewire everything, because repetition builds identity, and identity sustains behavior. Now let's make this real and simple. You don't need a complex system. You need a stable one, something you can follow even on your worst days. So here's a practical way to lock this in. 3 anchors. Not 10, not 20. 3. First, language. Every day, pay attention to how you speak. Not perfectly, but consciously. Catch one complaint. Shift one phrase. That's enough. Second, perception. Every time you notice judgment, pause and replace reaction with curiosity. What can I learn from this? Just that. Third, ownership. Whenever something doesn't go your way, instead of explaining why, ask, what is still in my control right now? Even if the answer is small, act on it. These 3 anchors, if repeated daily, will start breaking the old loop. Not overnight, but inevitably. Now here's something most people ignore. You don't rise to your best intentions. You fall to your most practiced patterns. That's why awareness must become practice. Not just something you understand, but something you do, daily, quietly, without needing validation. And over time, something interesting happens. You stop reacting automatically. You start choosing. You stop seeing problems the same way. You start seeing possibilities. You stop feeling stuck. You start feeling in control. Not because life became easier, but because you became different. And that's the shift. Now here's where it all comes together. Because once your language changes, your perception changes, and your sense of ownership returns. Your identity stabilizes. And when identity stabilizes, results follow naturally. Not forced, not rushed, aligned. But there's one final thing you need to understand. Because even with all of this, there's a moment, a very specific moment, where everything either changes or goes back to how it was. And most people miss it, because it doesn't look like a big decision. It looks small, almost insignificant, but it defines everything. And in the final part, you're going to see exactly what that moment is, and what you must do when it shows up. The moment that defines everything is a moment that almost no one pays attention to. It doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't feel important. No one around you notices it. But this moment quietly decides the direction of your life. It happens right after something triggers you. A frustration, a delay, a mistake, a problem. And in that exact second, you have 2 options. Not 10. Not a complex strategy. Just 2. You repeat the old pattern, or you interrupt it. That's it. That's the moment. That's where everything changes, or stays the same. Because in that instant, your mind will try to go back to what is familiar. It will want to complain. It will want to judge. It will want to explain why this is happening to you. And it will feel natural, automatic, almost unavoidable. But now you're aware. And awareness gives you something you didn't have before. Choice, not control over everything, but control over your response. And that's where your power is. Not in avoiding problems, but in deciding how you meet them. Because every time you interrupt the old pattern, even once, you create a crack in the system. And cracks eventually break structures. But here's the truth most people don't want to accept. This doesn't happen through one big decision. It happens through small decisions, repeated in invisible moments. No audience, no recognition, no immediate reward. Just you and the choice you make. And over time, those choices start to accumulate. They reshape your thinking. They reshape your reactions. They reshape your identity. Until one day, you look at your life and it no longer feels the same. Not because something magical happened, but because you stopped repeating what was keeping you stuck. Now think about this carefully. How many times in your life did things repeat? Same patterns, same frustrations, same results with different names. That wasn't coincidence. That was continuity. A system running in the background. But now you've seen the system. You've understood the patterns. And once you see clearly, you can't unsee it. So from this moment forward, every time something happens, you'll recognize the signal. You'll feel the pull to react the old way. And right there, you'll remember. You'll pause. And in that pause, you'll decide. Not perfectly. Not every time, but more often than before. And that's enough. Because change doesn't come from perfection. It comes from direction. Now let me leave you with something simple but powerful. You don't need to become someone new overnight. You just need to stop reinforcing who you were by default. And the moment you do that, your life begins to reorganize itself. Quietly, gradually, but inevitably. If this message made you see something differently, then don't let it be just another video you watch and forget. Take a second right now. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Because everything you're building here is not about motivation. It's about awareness. And awareness, practiced consistently, changes everything. And if you're serious about this shift, comment this below. My mind is ready for a new level. Because the moment you start showing up differently is the moment your life starts responding differently.